Welcome to the Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek.
Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek, where we give our audience a look into the world of manufacturing with a focus on the modern technology trends that we commonly call Industry 4.0. My name is Sam Russum. I'm the Senior Director of Smart Manufacturing Solutions at Grantek, and I bring a whole bunch of guests on this show to share their thoughts on the subject, their experiences around what works and what doesn't, and just to share and chat about some tips that are going to lead you to a successful digital transformation. Today, I am joined by Rick Roszkowski, who is from Cognex. He actually began his career with the Vision Group over at Allen Bradley as a software developer and a vision application engineer before joining Cognex in '98. Rick now has over 35 years of experience within machine vision and holds a variety of technical and marketing leadership roles. Since joining Cognex, Rick has served as Director of Engineering, driving technology development of Cognex's largest product line, which is their Insight Vision System, and as a Director of Marketing for the Vision Systems business unit. He's currently working in an executive consulting role where he gets to do fun things like this and focus on vision-guided robotics and Industry 4.0. And Rick also has a BS degree in Computational Mathematics from Marquette University. Great to have you here, Rick.
Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. And it's great. I think it's really great to have Cognex here, right, with kind of that device and that vision expertise. It comes up all the time in Industry 4.0, so I'm super happy to have you here. But we always kind of like to start with a big, broad question. What does Industry 4.0 mean to you?
I think, the textbook definition of this, stems back from Germany, really wanting to address the fact that there's zero population growth. They're a manufacturing powerhouse, and how are they going to sustain sort of this economic engine that they have, facing potential labor shortages, and they saw what was a lot of wasted time and energy from an engineering and administrative facet of just doing repetitive functions that weren't adding a lot of value. And so it's really to address this is how do we drive radical increases in productivity, and that required some disruptive technologies and some new ways to look at how we're going to do manufacturing, with the goal of driving out waste in the manufacturing process. And I think Industry 4.0 is really looking to drive these productivity gains through, I think, first, better visibility. We need to see what's going on in the factory and be able to access real-time production data from anywhere, not just down in the manufacturing line. We want to get increased transparency. So what's happening and why is it happening? And using analytics so that we really understand the data, not just there's numbers out there, but what's really happening in real time. And then start to deploy AI and machine learning so that we can start predicting when things are going to happen. And in particular, thinking about preventative maintenance by predicting rather than just having scheduled maintenance, which may or may not come at the right time. And then ultimately, how do we get our machines to be making decisions for themselves and optimizing the whole process by, we don't need human beings to do tasks where the machines have learned. How do I get orders into my supply chain? How do I scale back production because we've got excess inventory in the field? And so I think at the root level, at the implementation, there's a lot of different technologies being brought to bear to achieve these goals. And I think we're going to talk about some of those during this podcast.
I think we are about to. In fact, it's my next question, really, because as a technology provider, what is Cognex doing? What are the products that you have, and kind of how do they help with this digitalization?
Sure, I think that term, the digital factory of the future. I think Cognex offers machine vision and barcode readers that are prolific digitizing devices. We capture images.
Yes.
We have data that goes into the PLC and into edge intelligence devices now, trying to make meaning of the data. But the images can be of much more value than sometimes what we can do on the plant floor. We've got production line speeds to deal with, and we're trying to solve a particular problem, be it traceability or inspection. And we're able to offload these images. More and more companies want to archive all the images. Sometimes it's just a repository in case they need to go back and record keep and check something out. But more and more, it's like, how do we bring those images to provide more value and feed those images into machine learning and AI algorithms to figure out, is there something that we're not seeing? In a particular example, we have our barcode readers in logistics facilities. Reading barcodes is the most important thing. If we can't read a barcode, that package or box has to go back into the loop, and probably some human has to intervene in what's going on. And so we take images of barcodes or products where we couldn't read the barcode, and we send them to an offline server, and we have our Vision Pro software running algorithms to determine the reason we couldn't read the barcode. And it turns out that about 90% of the time, there's not actually a barcode on the product, but there's other times.
That's probably why you couldn't read it. Yeah.
There are other times when it could be a damaged label. It could be that a flap of a box wasn't glued properly. And through this data and through the analytics, we can quickly direct plant personnel to the root issue to correct the problem. So there's much less downtime, because if it's really a labeler issue or a gluing issue, you're going to get a lot of packages coming by, and you're not necessarily going to know where that's coming from. And so we can quickly redeploy plant floor personnel to address the root issue.
Yeah, no, great example. And one of the things you were talking about in there, that idea of kind of offloading those images, right? I know that one of the reasons that Grantek, or one of the applications that Grantek's used a lot of Cognex cameras for, is particularly when you need like some intelligence in the camera itself, right? And I think that Cognex is really kind of a leader in having smart cameras that are kind of self-sufficient, but there's only so much that you could do that way, and there is more if you kind of can access the cloud and access that higher intelligence on top of it, right? Yeah. Great. So that's where Cognex is at now. What do you see changing for you all in the future? What's on your roadmap that's going to bring even more value to that industry?
Yeah, I think there's two areas I think we're really focusing on. The first is this idea of edge intelligence, which is transferring data from our devices, not just to PLCs for production line control, but to platforms running algorithms and data collection that is a direct connection between the device and we calling edge intelligence. So we have an entire team and a business now focused on building edge intelligence solutions. And so today we're primarily focused on the logistics market with our DataMan readers, where we may have hundreds of readers in a distribution center, for example. And we're collecting information from all those readers. We're also managing those devices. So if there's something that needs to be done for, say, a firmware update, we can push firmware updates down to all those devices from a central location. If we need to get read rate statistics for each line, we collect it. And so we have a combination of data going to an edge intelligence device. Sometimes it might be a lot of just visibility. We can display what's happening. We can show read rates per line. We can show throughput per line. But then we can also have these offline vision algorithms running on that platform to determine root causes of no reads. So that's a pretty big area of investment for Cognex right now.
Right, but there's that idea, I know where like kind of you're getting those images from the line in real time. You might be doing a lot of analysis from them in the cloud or in offsite systems, but then you take the models developed from that and redeploy it to the camera, so it doesn't always need that connectivity.
It could be that case where we determine a root cause or an optimization that we could actually improve the reading capability by adjusting lighting, for example. So we might have an offline server determine that, and then again push those settings down back into the device to have it perform better.
Cool. That's really neat.
So the other area we're working on is continuing to add more connectivity options to our devices. I think when Industry 4.0 came out, there was a huge discussion around OPC UA as sort of the transformative technology that everybody would adopt, and you'd have this single protocol in the factory that all devices spoke. And I don't think that's materialized yet. I'm not sure it will. And it certainly doesn't seem to have a huge merit to be taking all the devices that are connected directly to control equipment and PLCs to convert those from existing communication topologies to OPC UA. And so there's demand for more. And for example, MQTT is a protocol that was early on in the discussion. It was relatively simple to implement compared to OPC UA, and it's gained a lot of traction. And so we're implementing a native MQTT server into our platform so that we can directly provide data, which includes not just the numerical data, but metadata back to edge intelligent devices. And then the other area we're seeing is just demand for higher speed, more synchronized communication. EtherCAT's a platform that supports that. And there's a lot of talk over time synchronized networks. And supporting these protocols typically requires customized hardware, so that your device is synchronized with what's going on with all other devices. And there's some new chip technology emerging where these chips don't just support a single protocol, but they actually support a whole variety of factory floor protocols, and they offload all of the protocol work from the main CPU, allowing that main CPU to focus on its main job of inspecting and reading barcodes and things like that. So I think that's an area where we're really focused on, is making sure that we offer the diverse range of communication strategies. And then also moving to platforms and newer platforms that will have multiple Ethernet ports. So today, most devices have a single port, but moving to 2 ports where you can have 1 port dedicated to your real-time data service, to your control architecture, and then offload all that image traffic, all of that HMI traffic, all of your edge intelligence data through a separate port that's being managed, so that you're not trying to share that bandwidth on your control network.
That makes a lot of sense. And also that idea of the chips that are kind of offloading and supporting multiple protocols, that's a new idea. Actually, I hadn't heard about that before. And that's maybe one of those things working more in the software world than in the hardware world, right? But that's really neat. And it sounds cool in that, like, it's not just Cognex, but it means that so many more devices are going to be so much more capable of being able to speak more languages and protocols in the near future. So, and you're also very right about the OPC UA thing, right? OPC UA is a great way to do OPC in a modern way, but OPC has certain ways of communicating, and there are other alternatives out there for different use cases. Yeah. So speaking of use cases, what is a good case study that comes to mind for you when you think about positive impacts from these digitalization and Industry 4.0 initiatives?
Okay, this is maybe not the first case study, but it's back in the 2007, 2008 timeframe. So this is probably a little bit before you heard a lot of talk about Industry 4.0, but it was a very progressive manufacturing company that was pushing forward with sort of the digital factory, probably in advance of a lot of other companies. And they wanted us to implement a new time synchronized protocol that would require us to integrate new MAC-PHY hardware into our devices and implement or add an FPGA into our device. And it wasn't clear initially that it would be the best use of our engineering resources. The amount of devices being deployed, it wasn't clear the financials would make sense to do this. But the customer pledged that through this technology, they would be able to incorporate, instead of 2 to 3 vision systems per line, it'd be 5 to 6, and then it's eventually grown to 10. And with this new communication technology, their plan was they were going to have to spend a lot more on capital equipment, both on their control architecture and on the inspection equipment from Cognex. And they determined that the capital equipment expenditure was worth it because they could justify it and increase capacity on the line, significantly increase capacity, as well as significant scrap reduction. We don't think about scrap reduction so much all the time, but it was a major contributor to moving to this new architecture, which allowed them more precise control over their manufacturing process. And more than 10 years later, we're still working with this, manufacturing powerhouse that's really driving us to continue new innovative solutions for them.
That's really neat. And I've asked this question a bunch of times. People usually don't go back to 2007, 2008 to kind of bring up those Industry 4.0 stories, but I think it shows a really good point that, like, this is not starting now in 2022.
Right.
This is something that a lot of companies have been doing for a very long time. And it's not that all of this is unproven. It just might not be as prolific as, the everyday PLC yet, but these things are coming, right? Yeah. So tell me, what is like an industry that maybe you don't think is leveraging Cognex and computer vision and some of these capabilities as much as they potentially could be?
So when I started at Cognex back in 1998, our founder used to say, if man made it, we could inspect it. And if God made it, stay away. And he even had the wood doors at our headquarters painted over because he didn't want to see the wood grain. And so things that were more nature-based were not a good area for machine vision. But with new 3D imaging technology and especially deep learning technology, those 2 areas are really changing the types of applications we can pursue. So as an example, in the food industry, Cognex has always been strong on the packaging side of the plant, but we did little to nothing on the process side. Now we're solving applications on the process side, like using vision to guide automated chicken deboning machines. And so I think there are a lot more opportunities in the process world where we just really didn't have cost-effective solutions, where a combination of 3D and machine learning technology can provide real solutions to applications in the process world.
That's really cool and a really good point, right? So, all those times that we're clicking on, identifying traffic lights or things like that as we're entering our passwords, part of it is it's feeding in those networks that do things like that in the natural world and things. It's a really good point, though. You're right. Like in that manufactured environment, you have so much more control, and that is a great place for vision to start. But I can definitely see, I think we all see in our everyday lives, right? It's not working on the video right now, but just the way that, your computer can fuzz out your background in Teams and Zoom and things like that. That is a natural world, application of computer vision.
Yeah,
right
I think
there.
it's important that, people who may have looked at using vision in the past where it just wasn't economical or just didn't really work for their application. I think now is a good time to make sure that people are rethinking that strategy, because sometimes you can say this technology doesn't work for me and then not go back to it. And I think this is an opportunity for people to say, okay, let's re-examine, because there have been so many technological gains in the last 4 to 5 years where vision can be used in more places now.
Especially with all that stuff that you were just talking about with the cloud too, right? I mean, that idea of connecting these vision systems and having your plants connected to the cloud, again, 10, 15 years ago, it wasn't totally crazy, but it certainly wasn't common. And now it's starting to become a lot
Well,
more
you
common, right?
certainly had challenges with image offload and how quickly could you get images out. And, we continually face that challenge because, resolution keeps increasing. We used to deal with VGA images, and then it was 1K, megapixel images, and now it's 5 megapixel images, and then it's 10 megapixel images. And so, transition to things like gigabit Ethernet and eventually going to, 10 gig E, creating separate network ports for image traffic versus data traffic. Those are things that are helping us be able to move more data into the cloud, where in the past it was really not even feasible.
Cool. So, and then maybe to inspire some of our listeners around kind of the cooler applications of computer vision and machine vision, kind of what's a more like surprising industry or a more surprising use case that you guys have had to dive into that people might not think of?
Interesting. When COVID-19 hit, Cognex, like many companies, faced potential for some real economic hardship, right? And not knowing who's going to be making stuff, what was consumer demand going to be. And fortunately for Cognex, there was this massive demand to build test kits and ramp up vaccine production. And those created opportunities for Cognex because test kits, vaccines packaged in vials, needles for injection, all of those devices in the pharma world have to be inspected and need traceability throughout the supply chain. And so we had a long history of working with different medical device and pharmaceutical companies, but COVID actually created a unique demand for rapid scale up of technical solutions. We had a variety of existing communication protocols, so we could work with different vendors. And what happened was some of these companies actually realized that deploying this technology could become a long-term part of their Industry 4.0 manufacturing strategy, because it did bring a lot of value and a lot more repeatability to the process, and they could deploy it quickly.
Well, and was that an instance too, where it was valuable to have people off the shop floor when you weren't allowed? You just couldn't have as many people in proximity, right? If you could be watching some of these things with a camera instead of having a person watching it, that's
Well, that goes to a sort of a root of what does manufacturing look like in the future? And I've been in manufacturing plants in China in my career where there are literally thousands of people working in close proximity to one another, where they are doing manual inspection. Some tasks were difficult to automate, or you had, a lower cost labor market. And so you just put people on the floor, and, our devices, they don't contact or transmit COVID. And so, so they can be used in a lot of spaces. And again, I think the growth of 3D and machine learning technology is also enabling us to solve some of the applications that we couldn't solve before, where people were required. But certainly creating these work cells and automation is an important manufacturing strategy for most companies going forward.
Yeah, totally. So that's a good example, right? Kind of these COVID inspection kits, right? That's a unique use case you jumped onto. But maybe for listeners that might not be as familiar with Cognex, what are the common problems that you're solving with computer vision, and kind of what are those low-hanging fruits that really anybody should be doing these days?
We serve almost every industry. I mean, we work in automotive, pharmaceutical, consumer electronics, semiconductor. I think anytime you're making stuff, there's an opportunity.
Oh, so
Any type of
manufacturing.
manufacturing where you're making a product, or you need traceability through a supply chain, our vision systems and our barcode readers can be deployed. And, I think from the simplest case of traceability applications that are a combination of reading barcodes, but also reading date and lot codes in different industries. And, in some cases, like pharmaceutical, maybe food and beverage, medical device, they're sort of ahead of that curve. They've long had traceability initiatives. Other companies are starting to learn the value of traceability and making sure that we understand where our products are in the supply chain. And those are pretty easy applications for us to solve. But just basic assembly verification, just putting cameras out there to make sure that something didn't fail upstream, that when we put a product together or put a kit together, that all the components are in place. Those are some pretty easy applications. And then, what's emerging right now is this big shift to electric vehicles, right? There's this tremendous ramp up of sort of the change in manufacturing from traditional powertrain applications to battery assembly and battery inspection. And the battery inspection applications are particularly interesting because they're not solved using our traditional machine vision library of tools. We're actually leveraging work we did 15, 20 years ago in the semiconductor industry to deal with like laser weld quality and things like that, because the problems that you're trying to find, the defects are so small and they vary. And so a combination of bringing higher resolution, bringing technology from the semiconductor world into EV manufacturing, and then also bringing in machine learning algorithms is allowing us to rapidly attack the EV battery assembly market.
Yeah, so Rick, another question that we have. So this actually got sent to us from a previous guest, and you'll have the chance to do the same yourself. We always try to have a guest ask a question for a future guest. But one of the people I was talking to recently was asking around what Industry 4.0 technologies do you think would be maybe the most difficult to implement in a heavily regulated industry like a pharmaceutical manufacturing, that would still actually like be worth it. It's still going to provide value, even though it might be kind of a tougher hill to climb.
Okay, sure. One area we've seen some challenges is implementing machine learning and AI at the device level. As an example, for years, we've been using traditional correlation-based OCR tools for applications like date and lot code traceability. This type of vision tool fits nicely into the pharmaceutical application validation and change control processes because you can document parameter settings and detect when parameters have been changed. More recently, we've introduced machine learning OCR technology that can solve some very challenging OCR applications where correlation-based tools underperform. But with machine learning, there are no input parameters. You simply train a neural network using an image database. And if the tool encounters an image where it can't read a character, you can add that image into the training database, which updates the neural network. But there's no clear way to document what changed. You can requalify the application by rerunning the entire image database against the updated neural network, but you can't document that I changed parameter X from the value of 4 to 5. So that's created some sort of unique discussions on how do we actually validate change if something has to be changed in an application. But I do believe it's worth using this new OCR technology where traditional OCR tools struggle, because what's the alternative? Are you going to revert back to human inspection? Are you going to live with excess scrap rates? So I think the technology is certainly valuable to deploy, but I think it might require more of a long-term solution, which is a collaborative initiative with machine vision vendors like Cognex, pharmaceutical companies, and the FDA to develop new procedures to more easily adopt machine learning technology. And not just for OCR applications, but there are other areas where machine learning is solving problems in defect detection and other assembly verification challenges, where we just don't have a way to parameterize how the application is being validated. That's a particularly challenging one.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I think that you're talking about a very interesting challenge that you're right. I think goes beyond just Cognex to solve, right? But I do think the entire pharmaceutical industry and then life sciences manufacturing, with the way that they do validation and with the value of artificial intelligence and machine learning and the way that that could infect validation is a big question mark that I think a lot of people are curious to see how we're going to be able to capture that value while still keeping everybody safe and quality high. Yeah. And then Rick, so now is your chance. Do you have a question on your mind about Industry 4.0 that you would like for me to ask to a future guest?
Sure. I'd like to know, as you or your other guests think about Industry 4.0, when you talk to customers and companies, do they have an Industry 4.0 person with the title of Chief Data Officer or someone with the title that includes data governance in their role? Because an important part of moving to this digital factory is putting meaning behind the data, and that requires sort of a regiment and a methodology that I think is an immature part of a lot of manufacturing companies' current strategy. And as an example, as we send data from a device to a PLC, we send numerical data. We send 12 and the PLC says, great, 12 is the answer I was looking for. But 12 what? Is it 12 meters, 12 inches? 12, whatever. And so, it's important that we begin putting data dictionaries in place. It's important that we have a systematic way to define what our data means, especially as we move it up into the edge intelligence devices, up into the cloud, so that there's context to that data. And I think that's an area where I think a lot of companies need to focus their efforts on is their data maturity.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I certainly have met quite a few leads of digital transformation or Industry 4.0 or the smart factory in my time. But I do think that question around data governance and kind of chief data officers is a good extension of that. And I am curious to pick the brains of the other people that join me too, to see kind of how they've run into it also. So really good question. Well, hey, Rick, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm sure a lot of our listeners really enjoyed that. I think it was a great conversation. Before I let you go, anything special that is going on with Cognex these days that you would like to promote and make sure that people know about?
Other than what I've already talked about, I think the exciting news, especially in the edge intelligence world, I think is really showing that we have a keen focus on being part of the Industry 4.0 solution as a prolific data provider, and especially with the images that we collect. We have so much information available that we can put meaning to, but we just need more algorithms and more collections. So I think that's a key area for people to be looking at Cognex is how are we integrating into that analytics and higher level intelligence into their plans.
Yeah, totally. I think that's you're spot on for that. And then I'll also maybe even go back a little bit. I really like that point that you had earlier about if you had a problem before that you thought machine vision was the answer for, but the technology wasn't quite there, maybe it's time to go ahead and look again. A lot's changed and it's been a really exciting time. So hey, again, thank you, Rick, and thank you to all of our listeners. We really appreciate that you're here, and we would love to hear from you. So please do follow Grantek on LinkedIn to stay up to date with what we're doing. Subscribe to this Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek, wherever you happen to get your podcasts. And you can always email any questions or any feedback on what we're talking about to info@grantek.com. And please be sure to join us next time on the Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek. Rick, thank you again.
Welcome to the Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek, where we take a look into the world of manufacturing with a focus on stories and trends that lead to better solutions. Our guests share tips and outcomes that are going to help improve your productivity. I'm your host, Sam Russum, and today we're joined by Kevin McCluskey, Co-Director of Sales Engineering at Inductive Automation. Kevin, it's super great to have you here. I think I'm a big fan of Ignition and really like what you all are doing over there at Inductive. Do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself and Inductive Automation to our audience?
Sure thing, Sam. It's great to be here. Thank you for having us on. I really, we've known each other for a long time at this point, and we have a close relationship with Grantek too. It's great to be here. So I'm Kevin McCluskey. I'm Co-Director of Sales Engineering, as you said. I've been with the company for a little bit over a decade. And it's been a fun ride. Before that, I was working for a control systems integrator downtown Sacramento, and worked with a lot of wineries, a lot of food and bev processors. And then since coming to inductive automation, it's been, it worked with just all sorts of different customers across all sorts of different industries. So it's been hundreds of customers, if not going into the thousands at this point, that I've worked with personally. And it's been really rewarding. It's fun, and it's good to be here talking to you today.
Cool, that's great. And do you want to talk a little bit more about inductive automation and what you all do?
Sure, yeah. So for the listeners who don't know who we are, Inductive Automation is a software company. We create the Ignition platform, and that is the SCADA, HMI, MES, IoT platform that is available for anybody to purchase from us, download a free copy, grab, play around with. And we've put a lot of love and care and lots of work into creating what we think is the best platform out there for all of the things that we're trying to do with it. And so we have a lot of customers who would tell us the same thing. It's not just us that think that. So we've been really successful so far, and we're really happy to support customers who are engaging with us and moving forward. And a number of folks have made that switch over to inductive from other platforms or installed it right alongside their existing platforms. And so, yeah, I'm surprised if most listeners hadn't heard of us, but if you know, our website's great. We're happy to talk to folks as well.
Yeah, that's great.
For listeners who don't know who Inductive Automation is, Inductive Automation, we're a software company, and we create a platform called Ignition. That platform's for IoT, SCADA, MES, and HMI. And if you've used any of the traditional vendors in those spaces from 10 or 15 years ago, there's a good chance that you already know who we are, and you've already seen us coming up inside the market. At this point, we're one of the big players. So we're in over 100 countries. We have tens of thousands of installations around the world. And it's been a really fun process getting where we are from where we were. I've been with the company, as I mentioned, for a little over a decade. So I've seen the growth and have been part of influencing the direction that we go with that. We have a fantastic team who all is, brilliant engineers and business folks. And we've made some really good decisions along the way. And we're hoping that we'll continue making those and continue delighting customers going forward.
Yeah, that's all great. Again, huge fan of what you all are doing, and really appreciate you coming on the podcast to give your perspective. We have a lot of systems integrators and some of my coworkers on here. We have some end customers and manufacturers, and having that kind of the software vendor side, the people that are really creating a lot of the things to deliver to this market is really great for us to have too. So with that in mind, right, with you kind of being on that software development side of things, what does Industry 4.0 mean to you and people on the inductive team?
That is a great question. If you go back maybe 3 years, we were asking ourselves that same question. What does Industry 4.0 mean? Because, when it comes down to it, we've had a platform for the last decade that would connect all of these different things together and present all of that data in a unified way. And so we had the question, what's the difference between what a SCADA system is and what Industry 4.0 actually is? And, to me, I think everybody's going to have a slightly different answer here. But to me, if you're talking about a full Industry 4.0 type of transformation that you might be doing, it's really everything from device connectivity up through the communication layer, up through the presentation layer, and being able to unify all of that, being able to present data in a standardized way. And then also one of the really important pieces to inductive automation, and to me personally too, is the openness of the system, being able to have open standard technologies that folks are able to connect with, standards that are maintained by standards bodies in a way that it's not going to have any vendor lock-in. and you're going to really democratize the data, democratize the access to these systems. And so we inductive automation have standardized on MQTT and SparkPlug-B as the standards for that data transfer and that communication piece, that middleware. Although we do support as well OBC UA and other point-to-point protocols. We have support for all sorts of different protocols, but if we're taking a look at that communication layer, that's really a true IIoT or Industry 4.0 type of communication layer. That's the direction we've gone with that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and you're absolutely right that yes, we've been asking this question as our opening question throughout the podcast, and we've gotten a whole bunch of different answers. But a lot of the themes are the same, right? A lot of it is around this implementation of modern technology, very data centric, a lot of data democratization. But I do think it's really interesting how you're bringing up standards specifically. I mean, I do think that is one of the maybe less sexy things about Industry 4.0, but is very important, right? That we're all kind of doing this in generally the same way, where it is important to establish that consistency and standards, whether it be a protocol like an MQTT or kind of a bigger guidance like something like an ISA or ISO standard. You're right. And I think that it's a good reminder that a lot of that material is out there and can be leveraged by people. You don't need to reinvent the wheel from scratch. You know, there's a lot of good information out there that you can be building from, and things, accepted standards that you could be using to jumpstart your journey.
All you've really done is move from one vendor lock-in to another, and in another 5 or 10 years, whatever the upgrade cycle is, you're going to have to move again. So it doesn't really get you true transformation if you're going from one closed standard to another closed standard. I think that open standards are one of the most important things that's happened inside the industrial space. It's happened on the IT space a long time ago. And I think that the industrial space is really catching up with that these days. And if you're not moving to a platform with open standards and with open standard support, you should really reevaluate your priority and figure out if that's the way that you want to go, or if you want to explore some other options. There are a lot of platforms out there now that do support open standards. It's I think does.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then, so in addition to the adoption and embracing open standards, what are the other ways that, as you all are working on the Ignition platform, that you're really thinking about realizing digitalization for your customers, and what other things are you building into the platform to make sure that it's a really great tool for digital transformation?
Yeah, great question. So there's a lot of ways. So we have inside Ignition, we've got a full IIoT solution, really. And I mentioned MQTT and SparkPlug earlier. Those are a couple of standards that we've built in. There are a lot of modules that Ignition has. Ignition's built from modules. And if you're not familiar with Ignition, you could almost think of it like apps on your phone. Basically, these modules provide additional tools in your tool set, and they plug into the platform, and they all extend the functionality. And of course, the Ignition platform can scale out horizontally as well as vertically. And so you can have multiple installations across enterprises. We have a much, it's really a huge, a huge market share at this point on the enterprise side. Go back a few years and we were getting into that. And at this point, we just have so many customers who are using us for across the board installations that are running their whole enterprises, that are across multiple different facilities and locations, or tens of thousands of oil wells that are out, wherever they happen to be, or it could be power distribution, or it could be manufacturing or automotive. There's a lot in food and bev, and so I think that the technologies that are really helping enable a lot of that are those pieces that are doing the communication. But then there's also the importance of being able to garner insights from that data, being able to take a look at the data that is sent over these systems and being able to get information at a glance, dashboards, visualization, and there's sometimes I'll refer to something that's the Gartner hype cycle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but it's talking about certain technologies where it has several different points in this hype cycle. And basically it's a it starts low, and then there's some sort of a technology trigger, and then it goes high, and there's this peak, and it's the peak of inflated expectations. And then after that, it drops over to the trough of disillusionment. And so I think a lot of these Industry 4.0 technologies have started. They hit this peak. I think they've moved through the trough of disillusionment in most cases, and then they're moving over to the slope of enlightenment and plateau of productivity. And so if you get a chance, take a look at that graph. I think that we're through a lot of the hype, and we're actually seeing real differences that companies are getting out of technologies at this point and out of platforms that can bring that data together in a single central place and provide those insights that people are looking for. I've opened standards before, and I'll mention it again. One of the nice things that Ignition makes available if you're using it as an IoT solution is that we don't force folks to use just the Ignition tools if you want to use other things that are outside of Ignition. So if you're using Ignition for dashboards, you can use Ignition's built-in machine learning tools if you want to. But if you've hired a data scientist that is out of school, there's a good chance that they're going to know TensorFlow, and they're going to know scikit-learn, and they're going to know some of these other Python libraries, or maybe R, and they're going to want to use these tools that they understand and that they've spent their whole school career going through and learning and getting value out of and bringing value to your organization. We take an approach of allowing folks to use these best of breed technologies along with Ignition, and then just pipe that data. So you can pipe that through to the dashboards that Ignition's really good at showing these dashboards. And rather than folks needing to learn the machine learning tools inside Ignition, they can use what they know best and then just connect that up and present that information there. Do closed loop controls, send that information back to a central location, or back to even have process variables that are making recommendations for tuning those processes. If you change a set point by 0.2, you're going to get another 1% of productivity if that's what this machine learning algorithm is recommending to you, and that information can just be piped right back through. You can run these centrally and then send them down to all the different locations. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that we've seen folks doing and getting real world improvements from using this Industry 4.0 type of technology and making that transformation for the customers.
Yeah, and it sounds like one of the things that's really enabling that in your experience is that open philosophy, right? That idea that, Ignition and certain software platforms have their expertise and they do a certain thing really well, but the importance of being open and then being willing to exchange that information with other systems that do their thing very well. So that you have a whole bunch of kind of things that are all best in class, all working together to deliver an outcome. So, I think that's a great concept and a great, and that's a true shift that maybe not a lot of people realize, right? Kind of moving away from these more closed proprietary systems and opening things up a little bit more is quite a change, I think, in manufacturing, but one with a lot of gains. And I do think it's a big, important part of Industry 4.0. So with things like that in mind, kind of around the standard. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's an important philosophical piece for us as an organization. But frankly, it's only a percentage of our customers who actually use that. Ignition has a ton of built-in tools that are really useful and really productive, and folks can stay inside the Ignition ecosystem entirely if they want to. I think that part of the value of that openness is for organizations that are really pushing the envelope, that are going out there, that are already pulling tools in that they're using in their organization. They want to connect all of those. I think that those organizations are finding value in it. And then I think other organizations, folks who are just using the built-in Ignition tools, which is a very rich feature set that Ignition has, those folks often just appreciate the openness in that they know that they'll be able to adapt to the future. So if they get new pieces of technology, they want to plug right into this ecosystem. If they have a new device that speaks standard IoT communication, that's going to plug right in. If they do end up with another software vendor that is providing some modeling that Ignition doesn't have built in at that point, they can just connect it up. So it's probably, I don't know, on the enterprise side, it's a lot higher. On the folks who, we have a ton of companies who are doing single location or single plant or 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 plants. Those folks often aren't connecting Ignition with these open standards to anything else, but just having that foundation there helps set them up for the future.
Sure, and that makes sense, and it's also interesting because your software and your responsibility is to make sure that option is available for people, but the actual implementation of that and kind of getting these platforms and having them all work in harmony, right? That's kind of more consulting, engineering, design, integrators like us, right? There's a lot of different players that come in to do that. So maybe looking forward to the future, right? So if we're thinking about that connectivity, what's if you'll allow me to peek behind the curtain a little bit. Is there anything really exciting that you guys are working on for the Ignition platform that's on your longer term roadmap that you think is really going to be a game changer and help to facilitate the shift to more interconnected open systems in Industry 4.0?
Yeah, good question. So we have an interesting approach to when folks ask us the 5-year plan for inductive automation. What's your 5-year plan, or what's your 10-year plan, or what does that look like going into the future? We are such a feedback-driven organization that we don't want to lock ourselves into a 5-year plan or even a 3 or a 2-year plan in terms of our development. We want to be able to be responsive to customers, and that's a big part of our success, frankly, is that we take customers into account, we take requests into account, we take needs that are coming from folks who are in the industry into account in terms of what is being requested of us. And of course, we try to also we take a lot of pride inside our own innovation that we have inside as a company, but we're not setting things up where we say, 5 years from now, it's going to look like this. We do have a few things that are coming up in the short term that we have announced that we're working toward. That's going to be the next major version of Ignition. So Ignition 8.2 is going to have things that increase friendliness to version control systems. This gets a bit technical, and I know that some of the readers, some of your listeners will be technical, and some aren't. So if you're not technical, just bear with me for a second, or fast forward 30 seconds. But so we have integration with version control systems. Basically, we're taking configuration and we're moving that all to disk. And that's going to allow things like Docker rollout with containers in a way that is going to be a lot nicer for orchestrating. We are making that all friendlier for folks who are in validated environments. Right now, those validated environments take some work to get things set up and fully validated, as they always do with any software package. But if you take a look at past Ignition 8.2, having a verification of basically consistency inside that application that's validated, verifying that no configuration changes have been made, that integration with version control, that movement of the configuration files to disk makes all of that much, much easier and really streamlined in a way that is, especially folks who are in life sciences, they need that type of thing. Sometimes 21 CFR inside food and bev needs that type of thing. And so we're making improvements there. We're continually improving our tools inside our web application platform, or the module that it's called the Perspective module. And that is the visualization system that allows you to basically pull up a web app inside a web browser or inside on your mobile phone, and have that's where you'd have dashboards and visualization and control and all of that. That's our visualization system. So we're continuing to iterate on that, make significant improvements there, add to the components, add to the feature set that's inside there based on customer feedback. And We also have a bit of focus that is really happening around this idea of digital transformation, which is Industry 4.0 is often seen as a piece of this, right? So digital transformation is this big view of any technologies that are going to potentially help organization. And so the IIoT and the Industry 4.0 technologies feed into that whole approach. And so we're trying to help companies understand what they can do with digital transformation, where Ignition fits into the digital transformation journey, and give examples, continue to provide more resources, provide things that people can download from the Ignition Exchange, which is a free open exchange site that allows folks to share different resources, and inductive automation to provide and post some of our own resources there that we create, where anybody can download those as examples and demo projects and industry specific things. And we're continuing to add to the industry projects that are there. There's quite a few. I think there's about 6 or 7 there now, and we're about to add a solar one, and we're improving our water wastewater one right now. We've got the automotive one up and a number of others. There's an oil and gas there too. And so we're going to continue improving those and providing more examples for folks to use as a jumping off point for what they're looking at doing with Ignition and getting to where they need to go.
That's all really super exciting stuff. I really like the stuff that is on the roadmap, and appreciate that philosophy of keeping the roadmap agile and kind of getting more feedback from real users and real executives that kind of use the data and use the systems every day to help control things. I think that all sounds great. So I'll have to ask though, like, as you're having these conversations with plant managers and executives and things like that, what, beyond just Ignition and what excites them about Ignition, but like, what's the big promises in Industry 4.0 that they really latch onto and want to see realized through these projects?
It depends on who you're talking to. So at least I personally kind of look at folks in 3 different categories who we might be having conversations with. One would be C-level, executive level, a VP level, somebody who is squarely on the business side, and they may or may not have some technical expertise, but they certainly have plenty of business expertise, and outcomes are the things that are generally the most important to that group. And then you have the plant managers who are responsible for their individual plants, or the equivalent in different industries. So you're not going to have a plant manager in water, wastewater, unless you're talking about the water treatment plant, but you're going to have somebody who's responsible for a certain area, and same with oil and gas. And so someone who is about in that plant manager role, where they have an area of responsibility, they're trying to improve that area of responsibility that they have. And then you have the engineers, and those engineers are going to have a different picture of what's important. And I think that all of those pictures are significant here. The things that I think excite the executives and the folks at the C level and the folks at the VP level the most, and the director level, are the outcomes that we've seen a number of companies getting. So I mentioned a couple earlier, where unified dashboards essentially can be a big deal. And, if you just think about a dashboard, you're like, well, a dashboard is a dashboard. But if you think about it, instead of just looking at it as the pieces on that dashboard, but looking at it as the information that somebody maybe had to, rely on reports that were being delivered at the end of the day or at the end of the week, to switching that out to having that feedback immediately, being able to see things as they change, and being able to explore that data, then it becomes something completely different. So somebody who's at that level certainly cares about some key metrics, and those key metrics can be, instead of reported at a certain time, those can be real time, and they can be monitored, they can be watched, they can be reacted to. Someone still needs to make decisions based on that information that they're getting, but that data can be presented to folks And then, of course, data. In order to take data and get something actionable, you need to turn data into insights. And so one way to do that is to have folks taking a look at those dashboards and centralized reporting and have a person analyzing that. Another way to do it is to have an algorithm doing that. And so machine learning is a great way to do that in certain circumstances. So machine learning definitely isn't a magic bullet that covers everything. But if you have things that are specifically around regression analysis, for example, making predictions, where is something going based on where it's been, that can be a great solution for machine learning. If you're trying to do things that are categorizing things, if you're trying to predict failures, if you're trying to make other predictions for if something's going to go into category A or category B, and based on that, you're going to change the way that your production is going. All of those things make a big difference potentially, and you can apply those types of concepts to any data that's coming in once you have an IoT type of solution or an Industry 4.0 solution where you have all the data coming in. And I think that's what really excites people when they're at the executive CEO level, the director level there, or VP level. If you get down to the plant managers, they're caring about what their plants actually are producing. And they care a bit about what the engineers care about as well. And the engineers care about the technology. The engineers care about how quick is it going to be to get value out of this? How easy is it going to be? How reliable is it going to be? How bulletproof is it going to be? Is this going to be a technology that continues on for years? Is it going to be, open standards, or is it going to be something that goes away or that has under lock-in and keeps innovation from happening? All of that plays into the cost equation. If you're taking a look at long-term costs and the return on investment equation, and so that'll play into what the plant manager cares about, which is going to be costs certainly, and then also increases in productivity, increases in output, increases in efficiency, and being able to avoid problems as well. So there's no one size fits all. We're across so many different industries that it's a bit difficult sometimes to pull off generalities here. And each industry certainly has its own needs and desires. But that's, in a nutshell, kind of how I'm looking at it.
Okay, yeah, that's quite a nutshell there, Kevin. But really good answer.
A large nutshell.
And I appreciate all those insights. So yeah, I know we're kind of getting close to time, but I want to make sure that I get to ask you this. You get to see so many real life applications of all of these technologies to solve real problems. What is just one of the coolest, most unique kind of cases that you've seen of ignition in Industry 4.0 being applied just in a really interesting way that you'd want to describe?
Well, I'm glad you asked that. We have a lot of big installations that are across multiple states or multiple countries, and have folks streaming data from around the world. But if I'm just thinking about a cool application, something that is exciting to me, and maybe something that wouldn't have been possible without Industry 4.0 or these technologies, the thing that immediately pops to mind is these. Basically, so there's a company called Xocean that creates these unmanned marine vehicles that are basically little ships. You could think of them almost as speedboats. They almost look like speedboats or regular size speedboats. And they have all these sensors on them. Mm-hmm. And basically, these are unmanned vehicles that are going across the ocean, collecting data, reporting it back for government entities or private businesses. And they have folks who are able to pilot these. They can pilot them completely independently from the vessel itself. So they can be doing over the horizon operations. They can really be around the world on the other side and have video streams coming back so they can see what's happening. They can pilot left or right or forward. And then they can also set it up so that they're in a bit of an autonomous mode. So I almost like to think of them as ocean Roombas. They're going around, they're doing their thing, they're pulling up and gathering data and sending that data back. And it's this whole confluence of technologies that without Industry 4.0, without cheap cellular that's also really reliable, without the right technology and the right backhaul for these things, they're using MQTT Sparkplug in this case. Without the right software, they're using Ignition, which we love our software. So in their case, it was definitely the right software for them. They went through an evaluation. Putting all these different pieces together allows for communication, allows for basically for this whole technology, this whole stack to be economical in a way that they could actually create these and use them and operate them and be successful. And last I heard from them, their fleet is growing and they're doing well. And it's been a fun example because it's not the biggest example that we have out there. It's not a project that is absolutely huge scale and it's across the entire world, but it's such an example of how you can take some of these technologies and apply them to just about anything. And you end up with something that is new and unique and interesting. And, it gets me excited.
Yeah, I can see why the idea of ocean Roombas is really cool, and to power all of that through the Ignition platform is really, really neat. So that definitely not the example I was expecting, but definitely also one I'm happy I heard. That's really, really great. So so before we close out, Kevin, there's kind of two quick questions. So we always have our previous guests kind of ask questions that they want to be answered from future guests. So I have a question from a previous guest that I'd like to pose to you. And then if you could start to brainstorm as you answer about kind of what you want to ask future guests, that's what's coming up next. So an earlier guest asked, who are the fastest growing data analytics and startups in this manufacturing and Industry 4.0 space? So if we're collecting all that data, especially in an open platform like Ignition, where are the places where you're really seeing platforms that you're really seeing people use to turn that data into useful information?
So I might not have a great answer for this because we don't see a ton of folks who are taking that data outside of the Ignition platform, because often the Ignition platform is a great place to do that. So, it might sound a little bit self-serving, but Ignition,
we'll take it. That's fine.
I think that, yeah, sure. Some other names that have come up a little bit, just to round out the answer here. Snowflake has been one of the companies that has, grown in terms of folks asking us and in terms of conversations. We've got a little guide on our website for how to connect Ignition over to Snowflake as well. We don't have any official partnership with them. And then we do have some other companies that we do have partnerships with, or that we at least have a relationship with, that have connectivity from Ignition, and those come up from time to time. So there's the Canary, for example, that has separate small analytics platforms. Seek is somebody we've worked with for a long time, SEEQ, and they have lot more analytics there that they're doing, pattern recognition and things like that. They've got connections directly into Ignition as well. And there's certainly AWS and Azure both have a lot that's happening inside their platforms. We have partnerships with both of those companies, and they have too many services to count for each one of those different organizations. But there's a whole variety of things that people are doing inside both of those cloud platforms. And then Google Cloud is we see that sprinkled in as well. From time to time, that's kind of the third player. It's not as big as the other two in terms of our customer base, but there's a little bit of that. And so, of course, we're able to connect to that as well. One of the nice things that the Google Cloud Platform has is the online, basically, TensorFlow engine that you can spin up and you can interact with. So if you didn't want to run it locally, if you needed to run it in the cloud, you can run it there.
Cool. And you know what? Two other quick notes and asides from that. One is a pretty shameless self-promotion of this podcast, where I know you mentioned Seek in there. We do have an earlier episode where we interview Michael Rissi from Seek. So we go through a lot of questions with them too. So was definitely looking forward to having them show up in your answer. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then also, we joke about Ignition being one of those answers, but, I want to make sure we don't brush that off, too. You got to use the tools that you have, right? And if you have Ignition, there is still a lot of power that you can do in that. And, yeah, you can take things to some cloud-based advanced analytics and machine learning tool, but there's a lot that you can just do within that platform, too. And you want to make sure that you're getting your money's worth and really pushing those platforms to their limits as well. So I think that's a very legitimate answer. So.
Thanks. Yeah, and I'd encourage anybody who's exploring inside Ignition in terms of the analytic tools directly inside there to check out the Ignition Exchange, check out the machine learning resources that are there. It's certainly, just like any platform that has machine learning, it takes some expertise and some understandings of the algorithms, but we've got about a dozen that are built in that are all things that customers are finding value out of right now. So. And then, of course, there's most of the things that you see in terms of examples and dashboarding and case studies that we have out there are done directly inside Ignition. And so, yeah, lots of really good tools. So thanks for mentioning that, Sam.
Yeah, of course. And, pay it forward a little bit. What do you want me to be asking in a future podcast to another guest that we have? What Industry 4.0 question do you want to hear answered?
Yeah. Let's go with this. What are the biggest blind spots that folks have about Industry 4.0 right now?
I would love to ask that question, and I think we're going to get some really interesting responses to that. I certainly have a couple of mine, but I'll let the next guest take care of it. And then, you know what? One more thing real quick before we close out. Anything particularly exciting going on at Inductive, any events or things like that you all have coming up that you want to make sure we share and our audience knows about?
Sure, yeah. So we have our annual conference that we've had for the last 10 years here. That is the thing that immediately comes to mind that I'd love to share. That is coming up. Last year, we had it virtually and we had a great turnout. Same with the year before. This year, I'm excited to say that we are doing both in person and online. So we just made the announcement. That is going to be out in Folsom, California. If you're anywhere around the world, please come out. You can sign up on our website as soon as registration opens. And that is going to be the third week in September, I believe, or the date should be on our website. And then if you're not able to make it physically in person, of course, there is the ability to attend virtually. And so since we're doing both pieces of the conference this year, we had thousands of people come over the last couple of years, and we can't have thousands of people physically in person in the venue that we're doing. So we know that there's much more interest than the amount of space. So if you're not able to come in person, if you're around the world, or if you just don't happen to get a ticket before we're sold out, please attend the virtual conference. We have tons of great content and sessions, and I'm sure that I'll be talking a little bit. I have an interest in machine learning myself, and I think that I'm going to be leading one of the machine learning workshops. So if you're interested in that more, you can join for that. And if you can come out, we'd love to see you. So we're looking forward to being back in person with all of this. And of course, we're going to be trying to take the right precautions with all of it. We're very aware of what's been happening in the world in the last couple of years, and we're going to be very trying to do everything appropriately that we can to make it as safe of an event as possible too. So, but we'd love to see you. And the Build-a-thon is back as well. So if you know what that is, you're in for a treat. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up. And Sam, I'm hoping your company ends up applying because every company that's out there, everyone who's a premier integrator is able to apply to potentially be part of that. There's some challenges along the way. There's going to be a leaderboard. You can follow along with it. It's really exciting.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm super excited for ICC. I definitely think that we will be participating or putting in a bid to work for it with the build-a-thon. And I'm sorry if it came through on the recording, but it sounds like even my dog is excited for ICC. So yeah, clearly the event of the year. So that's awesome, Kev. Yeah, really hope to see you out there. I think that is a wrap. So thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us here on the Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek. Hope everybody really enjoyed that one. That was a really great conversation. So thank you all for listening as always. Be sure to follow Grantek on LinkedIn to stay up to date with everything we're doing. Subscribe to the Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek, wherever you get your podcasts. Email any questions, feedback, your thoughts, anything that you might want to know, info@grantek.com. And join us next time on the Industry 4.0 podcast with Grantek. Kevin, thanks again so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Sam. It's been a pleasure being here.